Planning Applications Committee. I think most people have either been on the committee before or some members, but if you're not and you're any new members, can I give you a welcome? And as I always say, don't come on this committee if you want to make political points or anything else. It's a decision-making committee, and I hope you do enjoy that aspect of it. Okay, thank you, and also a welcome to Joanne. Joanne Archer is from County Highways. So if there's anything during the debate you want to ask about highways, Joanne's the person to answer the question. Okay, item number 1 is the evacuation procedures. We're not expecting the fire alarms to go off, so if they do, we'll treat it for real. And if I can ask people to leave the room, well, there's only one door into this room, so out of that door, down the stairs, and a metre across the road by the Yorkshire Bank. And if anybody did need any assistance, give us a shout, we'll make sure that's provided. It's also a good time to remind people to either turn your phones off or to put them onto silent. And just to let people know that is that normal practice of this council is this committee will be filmed and then put out on YouTube within the next couple of days. Yeah, that's if it doesn't go on for too long. Right, item number 2 is to receive apologies. I'm assuming it's the same. I've had apologies from Councillors Longdon, Rudkin and Watkins.
Yes, Councillor Rudkin and substitute Councillor Tandy.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot about the stuff, we just started that. Item 3 is to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of April. You happy not to sign those?
Yes, Chair. Yes, Chair.
Thank you.
Is he okay?
And item number 4 is to receive any declarations of disclosable pecuniary and other interests in accordance with the members' code of conduct if it hasn't already been printed on the agenda. Councillor Sargent.
I've had some involvement with item number 2, where in the past, but just confirming that I'm not predetermined.
Councillor Graham.
Only the same as the previous meeting with regards to residents and the Newgate Arms planning application.
Okay. Councillor Panda.
Charles, what number 4, no, I had a letter and on the corner, but I didn't say anything.
Okay. Well,
Last check, the number 4 item.
that may well come under contact. Oh, 4's been withdrawn? Oh, no, nothing.
On the other side.
Or the other side.
Right, item number 5 is declarations of contact. Item number 6 is applications on where the public have indicated a wish to speak. If I just run through that for those people that haven't been before, or maybe you. When the item comes up, and we'll take it in the order we got it, the officers will present the report. Following on from that, I'll take the speakers as listed on our list of speakers. You're allowed to speak for 3 minutes. Once the egg timer goes off, I will stop you. That's just so that I'm fair to everybody, that they get the same amount of time. However, members may want to ask for any points of clarification. It can only be to clarify something that you've said during those 3 minutes. Following on from that, officers may or may not wish to come back on anything that's been said. And then once something's been moved and seconded, the matter will be open for debate, and hopefully the committee will make a decision on the day. We do normally, but on occasion, as we did today, we might have a site visit or seek further information. Right, I think that's that bit of it. So we can go on to item number 1, which was our site visit, the Nuneaton Arms Bedworth.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the creation of an external patio to the front of the Nuneaton pub on Nuneaton Road, Bedworth. The patio is to have new hard surfaces, planter troughs, and there is to be new cladding and blocking up of a side entrance to the pub. It was deferred from the last committee in order to carry out a site visit to assess the appropriateness of a screening boundary fence to the patio and any highway safety implications with the application. This was carried out earlier this afternoon. As members will see from the agenda, objections have been received covering matters such as noise and disturbance, antisocial behaviour, lack of parking, increased traffic and loss of privacy. In addition to the objections, the application is also being reported to committee at the request of Councillor Grant. Officers consider that the key issues with the application are the principle of the development and what can actually be considered, the impact on residential amenity and visual amenity, and the impact on highway safety. According to case law and past appeals, as set out in detail on your agenda, public houses and the land surrounding them have been found to be one single planning unit. This means that the whole of the site, which includes the building, the pub garden and the car park, fall within the A4 public house use and not just the building. As such, drinking and other public house activities can take place in any area on the site, provided the licence allows it. In this case, licensing have granted a licence to allow the front of the pub to be used for drinking, but with hours restrictions that I will deal with later on in my presentation. There is no change of use to be considered on this site, as the use of the land for a patio is the same use as the existing public house. Effectively, the pub could put out tables and chairs, and they have done, as we saw on the site visit this afternoon, and provided they were not permanently fixed to the ground, no planning permission would be required. All we are allowed to consider is the permanent structures and elevational changes being proposed and whether these are acceptable on the site. In relation to the impact on residential amenity and the potential for loss of privacy, the Residential Design Guide has been used to assess the proposal, and there are no issues with loss of privacy as the site is separated from the nearest residential properties in compliance with the standards set out in the Design Guide. Whilst it's clear that there may well be some impact from the proposal in terms of noise and disturbance, this can't be considered as a reason for refusal, as it's clear that the area could already be used informally as a drinking area without the need for planning permission. Environmental Protection have asked if an acoustic fence could be erected around the patio. But in terms of visual amenity, this would present an unacceptable impact on the visual amenity of the area. The proposal involves the creation of a raised patio area, so this area here, in front of the pub. The height of the patio area would be 170 mm, so that's 17 centimetres. This area here is to be block paved. Originally, the original plan showed this area to be slate scrapings. However, members raised concerns at the last committee with the use of these and thought that this could lead to them being thrown around and antisocial behaviour as a result of it. Amended plans have been received which replace the slate scrapings with bark chippings. The patio area is to separate from the remainder of the car park, so that's along there, by planters made of railway sleepers with a gate here and picket fencing. Cedral cladding is also proposed along the front of the building here. These elements are commonplace at numerous public houses and there are no grounds to refuse the application on visual amenity. As previously mentioned, licensees have confirmed that they have issued a licence to allow the front of the pub to be used for drinking. This means that irrespective of the outcome of this application, this area can be used for drinking in accordance with the terms of that licence. There is an hours restriction on the licence, which means the area has to be closed at 10 p.m. Along with this, a management plan has been submitted with the licence, which indicates that the area will be closely managed with one supervisor solely for that area during busy periods, then clearing the area of crockery and glasses and monitoring the guests using the area. Signs are to be displayed reminding guests to be respectful to their neighbours, and the complaints book will be used. At 10 p.m, the area will be closed and the guests will have to move inside or use the beer garden to the rear. It is therefore considered that licensing have adequately controlled the use of the area, which is outside the control of the planning system. In relation to highway safety, neighbours have commented that the closure of an access to the pub and the loss of 8 spaces from 36 down to 28 will be detrimental to highway safety. To assess the actual parking demand on the site, a parking survey was carried out by the applicant and the details submitted to the council with the application. The survey was carried out over a full weekend in February. Over this time, a peak of 17 vehicles was recorded in the car park, which equates to 65% occupancy. The council no longer has any parking standards in force, and therefore lack of parking alone cannot be used as a reason for refusal. County highways do not consider that the loss of parking is detrimental to highway safety in this area, and this also cannot be used as a reason for refusal. County highways have been consulted and do not object to the scheme subject to the imposition of conditions. At the last committee, members raised whether it was possible to widen the access that's to remain and wanted clarification who owns the access that is to remain into the site and the green land surrounding it. Highways have confirmed that the accesses and verge leading up to the pub's boundary is public highway maintainable land. At the last meeting, the highways officer stated that it was not necessary from a highway safety point of view to widen the access, and they have since confirmed in writing that the access that is to remain is considered to be wide enough to allow two vehicles to pass each other within the access. In conclusion, case law has demonstrated that we can only consider the physical and structural changes proposed to the public house, as the authorised use of a public house is given to the whole of the site. There are no grounds to refuse the application in planning terms, and other legislation, such as licensing, can deal with any potential for noise and disturbance coming from the use of the site. The recommendation is therefore one of approval, subject to the conditions as set out on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Mrs. Beardmore.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I stay here?
Yeah, if you want to, you could come forward or stay, but wherever you're most comfortable.
All right. Thank you very much. I'd just like to point out that from 2005 until March the 26th, 14 years the residents have had peace of mind. Before that, we had worries and we had problems. From 2005, when licensing restrictions were put on the Nuneaton, until March the 26th, residents have had a quiet community. For 14 years, licensing prevented drinking outside, on the car park and on the walls, keeping doors and windows closed due to loud noise, disturbances, music, entertainment that was inside the pub, disturbing the peace, and it worked very well for us. Licensing only agreed to the licensing changes last month, but already there's been one incident recorded the 15th of May. The Nuneaton is not in the middle of the town with shops and buildings. It's in a quiet residential area with mainly elderly residents. The brewery solicitor stated at committee, and you've just said, it would cause more noise and disturbance. Everything seems to be in favour of the brewery. Residents' views and concerns are not being considered. What could committee offer in support of us local residents? I repeat, the solicitor said it will create more noise. What can concessions could be offered, perhaps a smaller patio area with less seating, noise reduction, shrubs to prevent my privacy in particular and disturbances for me. We ask all of you, please, to take this into consideration for those of us who are being affected, your own local council residents. Would any of you or your elderly families like to be put in the position that I've been put into, that residents have been put into? Residents that have been talking to us all believe that this is a foregone conclusion and our concerns will be dismissed. Can the brewery and can the landlord guarantee a responsible response to our problems should we have them? For 14 years we've had peaceful community, 100% supported by licensing. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Are there any points of clarification? No? Mrs Morris?
Hello. I don't intend to go over the concerns presented on the 30th of April, but I would like to clarify a couple of points in support of those concerns relating to noise and safety. Despite the discussions at the last meeting stating that people have always sat on the wall at the front of the site, that's not factually correct. In 2005, licensing saw fit to impose restrictions on the pub to prevent drinking and sitting anywhere at the front of the premises due to the level of antisocial behaviour and noise that residents had to endure. We've therefore, as Chris said, had 14 years where this has not been allowed, providing us with some respite from the problems of the past. The current temporary tables and chairs were only out for 2 days when I had a wine glass thrown in the border of my property, despite the management plan being in place, presumably. In addition, I believe that Highways have overlooked the pedestrian access on the site on their site visit. As they stated at the last meeting, there was no pedestrian access point. From your visit this afternoon, you can see this is actually not the case, and that an access point from Deronda Close has been in place for 40 plus years. As the council owns the grass verge and entry roads leading to the pub, I think it's incumbent on you to ensure there is safe accessibility onto the site from a disability and discrimination perspective. The Equalities Act of 2010 states that reasonable adjustments must be made. Removal of the existing and only pedestrian access to the site that does not involve traversing uneven grassy terrain, worse in winter, or walking up a narrow vehicle access road with a restricted passing width and no pavement feels unreasonable and poses a real risk to safety. Again, from your site visit today, I hope you understand the concerns with the traffic distraction on a busy road, along with the problems of channelling traffic to what is a narrow entry and exit point. For the reasons outlined at the last meeting, we do not think the 3 concessions the residents are asking for is unreasonable going forward. A higher 1.9 metre fencing or boundary treatment around the proposed beer garden, whilst we accept it would not cut out all the noise, it would reduce some and constrain littering and glasses and bottles in the local area. But more importantly, mitigate the traffic distraction at the double bend. Provision or retention of a clear pedestrian access point from a pavement is put in place to mitigate accidents and comply with legislation, and widening of the entrance road owned by Highways to allow for clear, safe passage of 2 vehicles. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any points of clarification? No. Okay. Claire, anything you want to come back on at this point? No? Okay, in that case, can I move the recommendation, which is to grant planning permission subject to the conditions printed? Is that seconded? Sorry? No. No, okay, thank you. Any member? Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Chair. Now that we've gone away and done some research on who owns the entry point, as we've just heard from residents, one of their main concerns is retaining pedestrian access on that side of the road to Deronda Close, which is a residential road and also linked to Harbury Avenue and a wider residential area. Are there any possible conditions that can be attached to retain some pedestrian access on that side of the road?
Joanne.
The easiest modification to make would be to achieve a pedestrian point of access. would be to, obviously there's an existing footway along Deronda Close all the way along the frontage. It would be to continue that in, and you could form another point, another gated entrance point, or bring them along to the shared access point where the vehicle entrance would be as well. So from a security, there are options. It depends from a security point of view what the board would prefer to do. In terms of existing pedestrian points of access, there are currently 3 points of access. We haven't got any information that tells us where most of the pedestrian traffic falls from. Obviously, the one thing to bear in mind would be to put provisions in where most pedestrians walking from. If they're actually walking from Nuneaton Road, coming in from Deronda Close doesn't help those people.
Well, as I was talking about is people who use that to access Deronda Close and vice versa, because that's quite a heavily residential area, and there's 2 pathways down Deronda Close which lead to Arbury Avenue, which again is a road with lots of cul-de-sacs off, which is heavily residential, including quite a lot of older residents. So I think it would be important to retain that, so I'd like that to be included as a condition. Also, is it possible to include as a condition some widening of the entrance point? I know that you say that it can take an oncoming car and an incoming car, but it still seems quite narrow to me, especially with all the 4x4s on the road in that particular area.
I mean, in terms of the accesses that are there now, they're both roughly 5 metres wide, so that's plenty for 2 vehicles to pass. You've got a long frontage for vehicles to wait if they're a little bit unsure about actually entering the car park or not. That just slows traffic down. So I'd say that's probably a good feature, in so much as you're not going to get people driving straight into the car park where they're likely to see pedestrians moving around even more.
Well, at least now that we know that comes under county highways, if that's not an acceptable thing, it can be
I think I've set out our work as a chair before. If you want to continue, go through the chair, please.
Chair, may I continue, please?
Yes.
Thank you. No, I did want to know about one more possible condition that could be attached, and we had residents saying that they'd like to see some sort of shrubbery which wouldn't necessarily make the area look worse from an aesthetic point of view, but would provide some level of privacy. Is that an acceptable condition that we can attach to this?
There is planting as part of the application that you're considering. It does include planters and planting. On the pieces where
But is there anything taller than what is depicted that can be attached?
No, that's the application before you. You couldn't condition. It would be unreasonable to put other conditions on.
Okay, I
because
understand.
that's the application before you. So you've got a choice of approving it, or if you're not happy with how it's set out, then refusing it.
But just to confirm, the pedestrian accesses can be conditioned.
No, the pedestrian access is shown as being closed off. That's what's on the application before you. You couldn't condition that it remain open because the application shows it being closed off. The one from Deronda Close.
In terms
This
of
access here comes off Deronda Close. That is to be blocked off. And the pedestrian access will be through the car park, through this gate here, and into the pub and patio area.
But what you were referring to at the beginning was...
Councillor Graham, I'm not just going to have a conversation across the table.
I'm sorry, Chair.
What is it you want to say?
I just wanted to ask, the first point that I raised about pedestrian access, you said that something could be conditioned to allow...
Okay, let me clarify. Yes, it could be conditioned because we won't be able to, because that's not the application before us.
Yeah.
What I said was the land in front of the pub is adopted highway land, as Claire set out in the explanation. So any of that highway land can be used for the purposes of gaining access to development sites.
I see, no, it can't be
Okay,
attached.
right, okay, thank you. I mean, the access from Deronda Close is what we've got. It's being planned to be closed off. I guess at some point in the future, if the pub wanted to open up again, they would have to put another application in to reopen it. Councillor Sargent,
I just picked up, obviously, at the site visit that, you know, listening to sort of the answer to Councillor Grant is that you can't condition things, but I just wanted to make the point that as you come up Nuneaton Road, the path ends, doesn't it? So I'm assuming at some point people would, to get to Geronda Close, probably would walk through the pub car park and that exit that's going to be closed. And I think maybe that's what the residents are thinking, that in actual fact from that point to Geronda Close, you have to sort of cross the road and kind of walk round, so there's no path through, and that would be my concern. You know, that in effect the pedestrian access around the pub, if you like, there's nothing there, is there? So there's no pavement
No.
on that grassed area.
And although it's a public house, it's still private, so it's not a public thoroughfare.
But I will assume
So
that
would it be
people,
public
yeah,
highway?
would that. I think maybe that's what the residents were saying, that you know that they've used that access, if you like, to walk through, and effectively that's been cut off. You know, it's the pub's property, isn't it? So I'm not saying it should or it shouldn't. I'm just saying that you know there's no path, if you like, from A to B. So, in effect, people are going to walk across the grass, aren't they? Or
And since that estate was built, there's never been a path.
No.
And I pointed that out, so it's a bit of an oddity, and I know Joanne's gone away looking at that. You know, I know from the last house in Nuneaton Road before the pub, there's just a strip of land that you have to cross on the grass. So.
Can that be looked at, obviously not as a condition? As
Yeah,
you said?
I can't look at it, again, looked at as part of this application. What I will do, I'll refer back to County Highways and Road Safety and explain the situation and ask that and how long it will take, but that they put it into some plans going forward when they do some footway works.
Councillor Pandey.
I'm just concerned with the highway safety. You know, they said that the number of spaces reduced from 36 to 28. And the survey was carried out by the applicant and not an independent survey. So I was concerned whether that was right, you know, the figures which were given. When the survey was done by the applicant, not by the independent people. I know there may be more car park, people using them, and they may be parking on the roads.
My understanding is that's kind of the normal process,
Yes.
and then it's reviewed by the officers.
Yes.
We wouldn't normally go out and do surveys on support of a planning application. We expect the applicants to submit all the information that we require, and then we go out and we review that information and go out and check on that.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. It is a difficult one because public houses in residential areas, if and when they decide to try and change what they want to do, can be quite controversial with local residents. Indeed, I've got one in my patch, which the Whitestone, which residents weren't happy about with the changes, but as far as I'm aware there haven't been any complaints, none to me anyway. And also this is where the intersection of planning and licensing is coming into effect, and whilst I can understand what the speakers are saying, it's not the right forum for us to do a lot of the stuff here. As much as I would like to try and look at that, I can't. I've got to look at it with my planning head on and not a licensing head on. We're stuck because we have to look at what is within the actual red line of what the planning application is. And I understand Councillor Graham's points and the residents' points about access, but that isn't within the red line. That may be addressed by County Highways if they can find some funding to put a pavement down or do something that way, but I can't look at that as I understand it through the planning committee, as much as I actually do agree with that, because I think you highlighted yourself, Chair, it is an oddity that there is no pavement there at all. That's another person to look at, not this committee. And also, pubs are operating in a very, very difficult market ever since the smoking ban, really. And we've seen nationally the picture is that the number of pubs is declining, and pubs want to try and make themselves as competitive as possible. Now, if this pub was to shut, and I can remember a number of applications that we've had before this committee where pubs have shut and put in applications to be converted into houses or flats or whatever, residents tend to get more up in arms about that because you could probably get quite a few flats or houses on land of that size. and I'm sure residents would be equally as unhappy, if not more unhappy, with that. So it's striking a balance between the residents and the business needs of the property and the planning legislation. So as much as I would like to be able to do something about the boundary treatment, which I can't because we asked about that, I'm pleased to see that purple shale stuff is gone, because I was concerned about that and the potential for antisocial behaviour, especially if people have had a pint or two. And the shrubbery, there's not a lot we can do, so I'm going to have to vote for it because I haven't got a planning reason to vote against it, as much as I would like to. Everything else seems to be in the licensing department, not in the planning department.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Llewellyn-Nash.
Mr Chair, I wanted to go back to the car parking issue. The fact that it was done during the quiet weekend in February, when we know that the weather wasn't very nice, and so therefore you wouldn't have got very many cars there. But now that the weather's changed, obviously if you was to do that again, I think there would be more. And so you can see that there could be a potential car parking issue. And I understand the residents' anxieties about that. We know it's grass verges down both sides towards Bedworth, and and there's quite a large grass verge, if I remember correctly, outside the church as well. So potentially you could have cars just parking on there. I don't know if there's anything that could be done to reduce the size of the patio, probably not, but there is a potential of car parking issues which will further again sort of increase the householders' anxieties as well. But sorry, Chair, as Councillor Wilson has said, yeah, it's good that you've got the bark, and clearly the landlord has made some changes which have been good.
Okay, thank you. Any other member? If not, I'll just make a couple of points if I can. As it's already been said, a lot of the things on this would be able to be dealt with under the licensing regime, and we do rely on most things these days on neighbours being our eyes and ears of things, if they're not quite right. But as we've said, there's licensing conditions done on that. We can only look at the planning application that we've got in front of us. And I can remember at the last committee, and it's been repeated tonight, that actually the pub can do this anyway. Most of what they're proposing they can do anyway, and we've got no control over it in that. In effect, what this does is the planning process is giving a bit of strength to something. So, what's out there now could be there anyway, like it is now, and what the extra is the low fencing around it. I did want to ask something, and it's about possibly adding conditions. Whilst I understand from what I can see on the drawings is that the current access, which is going to be blocked off, that's going to be a new curb line installed at the bottom. So that in effect makes it, and my thinking on that probably improves the safety of that junction there where it's a crossroads now. But it's going to be a bit of an oddity, and I don't want to kind of have something that's encouraged as an overflow car park. Is it possible to condition that tarmac is taken up on that the current existing one, and that the grass is carried on over? Is that possible to condition that?
Condition 3 on your agenda states that the patio area can't be used until that access has been closed off and the curb and the verge reinstated. that's on the agenda as condition 3.
Oh, so by the verge, you mean the grass
Yeah, yeah.
would go, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
The whole
Okay,
of it.
I just wanted to be, okay, that's fine then, okay. And I'm just interested in this thing about the survey on the vehicle movements and the car parking. I kind of have a slightly different take on that, in as much as if you're doing a survey in February in the winter, there's probably, to my way of thinking, more chance of people travelling to the pub in a vehicle rather than in the summer, when you'd probably perhaps walk there. But I guess that's a matter of interpretation. Right, if there's no other member wish to speak, the recommendation which has been moved and seconded is the one that's printed, and that's to grant planning permission subject to the conditions printed. All those in favour of that? And against? And abstentions? Okay, so that's approved. Okay, we can move on to item number 2, which is the square Outbuilding.
This application is for the erection of 14 assisted living apartments and includes the demolition of existing buildings. The occupants will be adults with a range of disabilities. The intention is to provide specialised accommodation that will increase the independence of each occupant over a period of time. The site is within Borough district centre, where there are a mixture of uses. The application is being reported to committee at the request of Councillor Andy Sargent. No objections have been received from neighbouring properties. With regards to the principle of the development, as the council does not currently have an up-to-date adopted development plan, the MPPF makes it clear that permission should be granted unless the MPPF advising against doing so, or the impacts of granting permission are so adverse they would demonstrably outweigh the benefits. The council cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable housing sites as required in the MPPF, and this is a matter that weighs in favour of the application. The proposal here is for 14 assisted living apartments, and although this type of housing does not make up the majority of the need, it is part of the need. The site is designated as a non-strategic housing site within the emergent borough plan. The plan has gone through an examination and there are limited objections to the non-strategic sites, so this is considered to carry some weight in favour of the proposal. Further to this, the inspector made no modifications to this proposed policy in the plan. The proposal would constitute development on previously developed land, and the development of this land for residential purposes, especially for assisted living, which is a growing need in the borough, is considered to be an appropriate use of the land. So that's the site there, that's the existing pub, and would involve a demolition of this property here and that property there. The surrounding area has a good deal of commercial uses in, with some residential uses scattered around, and it is within Attleborough Village District Centre. The site is also in relatively close proximity to the town centre, which brings added benefits such as a shorter walking distances to shops and facilities. In terms of residential amenity, there are some windows at first floor level in the business premises opposite the site, but it does not appear that they are residential properties. In any case, there is approximately 24 metres separation, which complies with distance standards. There is a flat over the Fox Inn public house, which has an obscure glazed side-facing window to a bathroom, which is not protected. There is also a side-facing bedroom window, but as this is a secondary window, it is also not protected. Distance standards are met in relation to their rear-facing windows. With regard to the residential amenities of the future occupiers of the apartments, Environmental Health have no objections and have requested that a condition requiring details of a noise attenuation scheme to be submitted and is added as condition 4. The agent has confirmed that triple glazing and mechanical ventilation will be used to all the windows in the 6 nearest apartments to the adjoining public house, and full details will need to be submitted under condition 4. The proposed building would be sited on a fairly prominent curved road where the square, which is here, meets Bull Street here. The proposal is to be 2-storey and would primarily face forward onto the square, but the side elevation will also be visible since it will sit forward of the nearby club, which is located here on this side here. The building would come quite close to the road, especially as the road turns, but it is not considered that the massing would be overbearing, particularly as the existing buildings also sit fairly close to the road, as does the existing public house. The ridge line of the proposed flats is slightly higher, about 1.4 metres, than the adjoining building. So that's the public house there, and that's the ridge line of the proposed flats. But it's not considered that this would be to such a degree that would cause significant harm. The frontage of the proposed apartments would have a relatively logical fenestration with openings lining vertically and horizontally. Other features include sills, a storm porch over the entrance door, and contrasting darker detailing brick string courses, which do add interest to the elevation. The side elevation facing onto Bull Street, which is this elevation here, will include 2 large sections of brickwork with windows placed centrally and exposed chimney at the ridgeline of the side gables. There is a lot of brickwork on display here, but given the placement and orientation, it is considered that this elevation should carry enough interest. A car parking area is proposed at the rear of the building, located here. The access would be off George Street via a existing public car park. So the entrance would be down off George Street along here. Access then via the public car park into the private car park of the apartment block. The car park will have 9 spaces, and given the proximity to the district centre and this free public car park here, this is considered sufficient. County Highways have no objection, subject to conditions. Section 106 contributions have been requested from Parks, Sports Development and the George Eliot Hospital NHS Trust, as detailed on the agenda. The applicant has confirmed they accept these contributions. In conclusion, the site is a non-strategic site in the emerging plan, which, although not adopted, carries some weight given the stage at which is at and the lack of objections to that policy. There are clear merits to this proposal and only very minimal harm which can be overcome with conditions, and therefore the proposal is recommended for approval. The recommendation is therefore approval, subject to conditions and the completion of a legal agreement. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Claire. Councillor Sargent isn't a speaker anymore. I think this was put together before he became a member of the committee. Tracy Clayton, don't think she's here. Okay. In which case, to move things along, can I move the recommendation, which is to grant planning permission, subject to that legal agreement and the conditions printed? Is that second?
Seconded.
Any member? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I am generally sympathetic to this application. There's one thing which I wanted to clarify before I decide Trevor of it. If I heard rightly, you said there was going to be triple glazing to the 6 flats closest to the Fox.
Yes.
Can I ask why we aren't doing similar for the flats closest to the Liberal Club? Because I've been a few parties there in my time, and that can get pretty noisy too. And I would think you would be close enough to justify triple glazing on some of the ones closest there. So can we condition that the closest ones to the Liberal Club are triple glazed too.
Right, well, condition 4 does cover all noise attenuation. It doesn't specify which flats need to have that attenuation. That was just some information that had come from the agent, but that comes something that can be covered under that condition.
Could we put that as a note, Chair? Because I picked it up because you said the 6 specifically closest to that one. I would be concerned about the residents living that side to the Liberal Club, particularly that corner. Looking at the map, the corner is quite close to the. All right, there's the jitty in between which takes you down the side, but it is quite close to the Liberal Club. So, if we can put that note on that we would like some done on that side as well, just to make sure those residents are protected, because there isn't really any residential property other than that central in the green. But overall, I'm really supportive of it, Chair. It gets rid of a lot of the eyesore land there, which has been laying derelict for God knows how many years. I'm sure there's councillors on the committee who could probably tell me exactly how many. But I think the sooner we can get this moving and tidied up and delivered, the better. But that was my only concern, Chair.
I mean, from a personal point of view, and I guess I'll declare an interest as my old job as a glazier, but triple glazing these days is no more difficult or not much more expensive than double glazing, and for what it's worth, it could be done in every frame. But I'm happy to support that noting, but I can see the applicant sitting there, maybe he'll decide to triple glaze all of the windows. Councillor Sargent.
There's a couple of points. I did have an opportunity to go and see a similar site in Leamington, and I'm not sure whether it's triple glazing, but there's like a secondary glazing system on the outside, on the inside, or so that it basically cuts out probably 99% of the noise. And as Councillor Wilson says, it's not the Fox is an issue, but there's also the Liberal Club, there's the Royal Oak and Jollies, which the nighttime economy in Attleborough has increased, and there is a fair bit of noise there. And I think from the point of view of the triple glazing, but definitely this system that they've got in, I don't know whether that is triple glazing or whether it looked like secondary glazing, or what used to be secondary glazing. I went into the room, stood there, and you couldn't hear anything outside. It was just like completely sort of quiet. And this particular place in Leamington had got 3 nightclubs around it, so there was a lot of noise there as well. So I think based on on the conditions, on that condition, I would be happy with that. The other thing is that George Street floods quite a lot, and what my observations are is it runs down past I think number 14 is the one on the corner, into George Street. And I know it says here about detailed surface water, and I think one of the concerns is that obviously there's a garden there at the minute in and the properties are assumed at the back. I mean, there's trees and plants growing there, that there isn't any more surface water that runs off it into George Street, because it just flood. I mean, it's like a foot deep, and people have put on some of the properties, they have put flood gates on their doors to stop the flooding going in. So it'd just be, if we're going to do a detailed surface water runoff, I think there should be something that keeps that water that way, if you like, because we don't want any more problems in George Street, because that, I mean, literally is the back access to it, isn't it, the car park. So if you're flooding George Street, then you're not going to get in there anyway. So yeah, I'd be happy to support the application on the conditions that obviously triple glazing or the soundproofing glazing system, and obviously looking into the surface water.
Okay. Claire, about the flooding.
Yeah, condition 6 is added as a result of consultation with the county flood risk team, and that's the condition they've suggested. So details would need to be submitted under that condition, which also does include a management plan and maintenance plan and how it would be maintained in perpetuity. So, as I said, the details would have to come back to officers.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, okay to speak, it's not actually outside the development, it actually goes down the street to George Street a little bit further
Yeah, the
down.
intention
so-
is to not increase flood risk elsewhere, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Councillor Tandy.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I actually think it would be extremely difficult to find any use for this site, because as some of you may know who've seen it, certainly Andy has, it's derelict. It's a derelict site with what is effectively 2 derelict buildings sitting on it, and it's an eyesore. So I'm pleased that someone has chosen to put in a planning application for it. And also because of its position, because yes, it is on the bend, albeit the fact that as you go round the bend, you're moving into Bull Street, which is call it a cul-de-sac or a dead end, whichever you choose to call it. I think that one of the real benefits from this is the fact that the green on the square, it does have many facilities within the green that the people who would be moving into the properties would use. I could list some of them, but there are lots and lots of facilities there that people would use. And I think one of the big issues that we should consider as well, that this really is a genuine brownfield site, and hopefully what is being proposed, I have no objection to it, will make sure that it will enhance that particular corner of Attleborough Green Square. We're never quite sure which is where the green starts and the square finishes, but I'm fully in favour of this application.
Thank you. Anybody else? And just kind of add to that, it is a village centre and a very popular one for people to go out for a drink, and with the couple of restaurants and the takeaways and pubs and that. And so I take on board the stuff about the triple glazing. It can be done within a unit now, you don't have to have that secondary stuff. If I have a criticism, it's probably aimed towards the council, just to have a look into it for the future. I found it quite difficult to be able to look at the design of the building on the elevations, and we should be taking real account of that. And in actual fact, the one in the paperwork was probably a little bit better than that one up there, which was just, it was just too dark. And I think the design, it's a little bit better on the frontage than it is to the back. But personally, I think there could have been a couple of other things, but not enough for me to object to it at this point. And the one thing it certainly is, it's a sustainable location for all the reasons that we've just said, as well as being able to get into the town centre on a bus or anything. Okay, so you don't say, yeah. The recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to a legal agreement and the conditions printed, and a note asking the applicants to install triple glazing rather than the double glazing for sound insulation. All those in favour of that? That's unanimous, thank you. Okay, we can move on to item number 3, 37 New Road, Ash Green.
This application is for the retention of an outbuilding. The outbuilding is currently in place and is taller than that proposed under this particular application. It's located there on the site. By way of background, a complaint was received in May 2018 that an outbuilding had been erected without planning permission, and that is the one that's shown on the screen. This is the building that is currently on site and has a ridge height of 3.6 metres and sited in the front garden on the corner of New Road and Corley View. An application was submitted for the retention of this building, which was refused and then dismissed at appeal, as it was considered that the development would cause unacceptable harm to the character and appearance of the street scene. This current application proposes to keep the building in its current position and reduce the height by removing the pitched roof and replacing it with a low-level pitched roof with a maximum height of 2.4 metres, sloping down to 2.3 metres. So 2.3 metres here, which is the element which will be closer to the boundary. 2 letters of support have been received as detailed on the agenda. Officers consider the key issue in this application is the impact on visual amenity. Presently, the outbuilding is sited behind mature hedges and is highly visible, particularly as it's near the corner of New Road and Corley View. This application proposes to reduce the height from 3.6 metres as it is at the moment to 2.4 metres, sloping down to 2.3 metres. The resulting height would be screened by the existing hedge here. However, from a planning perspective, a hedge is not considered a permanent fixture and could be removed or cut back at any time without planning restrictions. Consequently, the outbuilding would then become an imposing structure in the street scene. A common characteristic of the properties fronting New Road and Corley View are that they are set well back from the highway, as can be seen from this image here. Indeed, number 37 New Road is set further back from the highway than its neighbouring properties. The previous inspector found that the prominence of the outbuilding was accentuated by it being sited at the road junction and the openness associated with its separation from the main dwelling and other properties. Furthermore, in the near vicinity, there are no outbuildings that go beyond the front elevation, which was also noted by the previous inspector. Consequently, despite the reduction in height, it is considered that the outbuilding does not respect the form and size of the original building and surrounding garden, nor is it in harmony with the character and layout of the property and neighbouring properties. This would result in an intrusive and prominent feature in the street scene. The recommendation is therefore refusal due to the outbuilding being intrusive and over-prominent. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Claire. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I've been contacted by the applicant in regard to this application, which is why I asked for it to be brought to committee. I've not met with him about it, but I have had some emails about it. I first became aware of this building when I was delivering leaflets for the elections in recent years. And I thought it had been there for hundreds of years, and that the Victorian property had actually been built later in the grounds of this outbuilding. It's been really well built, and apart from not being in keeping with the area, that's not the case. It's built in an arts and crafts traditional style of old bricks, weathered timber, and it looks like it's been there forever. I would say that it's not overlooked by any of the property on the road. Currently you can see the roof from the road as in the pictures if you look for it, but most people go past there in cars and you don't even notice the hedge is actually higher now. There's been emails of support for this one, and I've also received other emails of support from it, notably from the members of the Ash Green Residents Association, who one of them said to me that in their email that the initial complaint was motivated by a personal grievance against the applicant, and that you'll note that the original complaint hasn't objected this time. If we look at this, there are also a number of other sheds in front gardens of properties in this area. It's just the way that it is. None of those have been reported to the committee, so none of them have been taken away. It seems like the applicant here is being discriminated against because somebody had a grudge against him, reported the fact that the applicant had built a better shed than they'd got, and we've got a situation here where this has been refused, gone to appeal, and now we're coming back and the applicant's willing to take the roof away to make it even less obtrusive. I mean, let's put this in perspective. What we're talking about here is a shed at the end of the day. The applicant hasn't built a massive extension on their house. They've not built a block of flats without permission. We've got a small structure that actually, when you see it from the garden location, actually enhances the site. It doesn't detract from it at all. I understand that it replaces a shed that was actually there before. So it's, you know, we're in a situation where if we take this shed down, the applicant ends up in a worse position, having built themselves a better shed than they had before. Now, I appreciate that the officers have applied the planning process diligently here, but if we're just about the process, why do we have the committee? I would just ask you to perhaps go and have a look at it yourselves.
Thank you, Councillor Brown.
Thank you.
Interesting question while we have a committee. Any points of clarification? No? Okay, thank you. Anything at this stage?
No.
Okay, to enable debate to take place, can I move the recommendation, which is to refuse planning permission for the reasons printed? Is that seconded? Any member? Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also quite aware of this shed. I've passed it before for similar reasons to Councillor Brown, and personally I think it improves the appearance of the area, and I think it's interesting that we've got residents, the Residents Association and the local council who don't seem to have a problem with it, or at least have a positive view of it. And we've had residents writing in requesting approval, and the council saying that it should be refused. I think I know enough about this to vote and make a decision myself on it tonight. I don't mind moving a site visit, and it's up to another member of the planning committee to second that if they feel they should go over and have a look for themselves, and so that they can make a more informed decision. So I'm happy to move that now.
Thank you. Any other member? No? In that,
Sorry, I was a bit late. I was reading something.
Councillor Llewellyn.
Sorry, Chair. The reason for refusal, it says, for example, where development would cause harm to the local area. But when you read the neighbours' responses, as far as they're concerned, there is no harm to the local area. And actually, you know, it does look, if you know the area, as if it's been there forever. And it's not doing any harm. It's no higher than the original house, and I can't see what the problem is, to be honest.
Okay, yeah, you're quite right that we've had some letters of support. However, we have to assess an application based on planning policy and guidance, which includes the National Planning Policy Framework and our own residential design guide. And based on that, it is contrary to the advice that's given in that, in terms of being in keeping with pattern development, etc., as I referred to in my report. So that hence the reason recommendation of refusal.
Yeah, and when we get round to our little run of training, design and the stuff like that will be included in it as well. Councillor Pandare.
I just second what our Councillor Grant said, what the site visit, because I lived a bit further on the Curly Village side, nearly 16, 17 years. I haven't noticed anything awkward, you know, when I was driving nearly 3 or 4 times a day. But this is the only first time I noticed when it was going on the planning that is something looks different, but on the photograph it looks a bit like, you know, they quite pitched, but when you go actually there, you won't notice even anything wrong. So I prefer like site based, so then everybody can see, but as you can see, not on the photographs.
Any other member? Councillor Sargent.
Is it just a case that the original building didn't have planning permission and somebody's complained about it?
No. What do you mean by
The
just
shed,
the
you mean?
case?
The shed. Well,
Is that the reason for the?
what I'm reading is somebody's complained about the outbuilding.
Yeah.
So it's come to.
It required planning permission, so he submitted a planning application, which
So
we refused.
Originally, when he built
the
it,
building that's here now.
it was
and
built
site.
without planning permission. Is that what
Yes.
you're saying?
Whether it's there or not doesn't make a difference in our interpretation of the legislation. You don't lose marks, if you like, for it being already there.
So basically, somebody reported it,
Yeah.
the building, it hadn't got planning permission.
Yeah.
Retrospective, is that the word?
Yeah.
Planning permission was put in, and it was turned down for.
It was turned down by officers. The applicant then took that to appeal, and the planning inspector also turned it down. So that itself is a material consideration for us to consider when we're dealing with this application. But it's a different application because the applicant has suggested that it'll lower them.
And depending on what happens, but if, for example, it was refused, they would still have that same right of appeal as well.
Okay.
And it's been moved. Oh, sorry, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I just have one question as I'm thinking about this. If it was to be approved, could you just confirm me what use class it would be?
So it's used to the main house?
Yeah, the house itself is still, as I understand it, is still a house. The business is run separately from the house. The house is still as a house. So it would just be, it would be if me or you put a shed up in our garden.
The thing that concerns me slightly is that once they've got the permission for this in bricks and mortar, and we've seen it, I've seen it in mine, I'm sure others have seen it, is that they then go for planning change of use to convert it into, well, a granny annex or Airbnb, whatever they are nowadays, do it that way. That's my one concern. I actually think the application makes it look uglier than looking at it on the plan. The plans look as if it's been drawn on the back of a fag packet, if I'm honest. So the application drawings don't really help me. But if the committee was minded to approve, could we put a note on to say that any change of use would have to come to committee?
Normally what we do is put a condition on that says that something along the lines that it has to stay ancillary to the main dwelling. That would allow them to use it as a granny annex. Strictly speaking, and there is a lot of debate about this at the moment, you don't require any sort of planning permission to use something as an Airbnb. Or even a holiday let. It doesn't have to be Airbnb that are letting it out, or any form of holiday let. If the building was used as part of the business use on the site, that would require permission. But the other things that you raise concerns about could normally be done under committee development anyway, as they could if me or you had a shed in our garden.
Could we remove the committee development rights on this, if it was approved?
The permitted development rights go with the house rather than with this building.
I know it's small enough to look as if it is what they say it is on paper, just a shed thing. But we have seen, and I've had cases in my own where they've started off with honest intentions, as it were, and then you see applications come in for getting it in through the back door. That's what's concerning me, that it may look all right on paper now, but it's a difficult one, Chair. I can understand fully the reasons why it's been recommended for refusal. I can also see the point of view from what Councillor Brown has said, but there's that nagging doubt in the back of my mind about this backdoor access to getting whatever it could be in the future. So
Okay. Well, I'm going to test out the thing about the site visit anyway, because it was moved and seconded. It's kind of an amendment to what we've got. But in saying that, I know it's an area that quite a few of us go along quite frequently, and I actually think it is very prominent on that corner. That's my personal view. And there are new people on the committee, and we've got to have training on design and planning law and stuff. But nevertheless, the site visit has been moved and seconded. All those in favour of that? Nobody after all that. Okay, which takes us back then to the recommendation, which is to refuse planning permission for the reasons as printed. That was moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Lloyd. All those in favour of that? 4, 5, 6. And against?
Yeah,
No, it wasn't.
Well, there's only 11 of you here, so
Yeah.
somebody's voted to I can't.
It was 5 and then somebody else put their hand up. Right, I will do that again, so that we're absolutely getting this right. The recommendation is to refuse planning permission for the reasons as printed. All those in favour of that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
So that's lost.
That's not approved.
Not refused.
Not refused.
Sorry, not refused. That is, it's not refused. I need, as I, count?
Yes. I'd like to move approval, please.
We will need reasons.
Yeah.
I believe that the impact on visual amenity is not a negative one, as is corresponded by neighbour responses.
Well, the neighbour response is no, it's the opinion of this committee that matters.
Just say the first part of that again, Councillor Grant.
Just that impact on visual amenity is not a negative one.
Yeah. So no impact on visual.
There's no impact on the local amenity.
No.
Yep.
Visual.
Yeah, visual amenity, I've got that written down.
Visual amenity. Is that seconded?
Yes, Councillor Beaumont.
Right, sorry about it, it's important I get the stuff down right. Right, it's been moved and seconded that it's not no impact on the visual amenity of the area. Councillor Beaumont.
Chairman, I'm just anxious that we don't let the proposal fall, in the sense that we can go away from this meeting and the building stays as it is. In other words, there was a proposal brought to the committee and we should, as a result of this, be approving the changes to the building. It lowers the height and it reduces its mass to anyone using the street scene. Yes.
That's what we voted on now, isn't it?
But you would need to put a condition
Conditional on the changes indicated being carried through.
on the plans, yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Right, we're all clear on what we're voting on now? Yeah? So all those in favour of approval, because it doesn't affect the visual appearance of the area, impact on the area. All those in favour of that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That's approved.
Okay, so that application is approved. If we can go on to item number 4.
Thank you.
Oh no, sorry, that was a bit withdrawn.
That's what I was just going to say.
Just
that.
before I close the meeting, it was remiss of me not to have got Councillor Wilson as the vice chair of the committee. So I'm still getting my head around the new changes, so
Thank you,
thank
Chair.
you. I think that's everything. We don't have any items of any other business. Can I thank you very much for your attendance and declare the meeting closed?
Thank you.
Cool.